This one is Not Every Shadow is a Ghost by Jay Wilburn. You're the first person I've told any of this, and feels like a huge mistake to let this story out in the world. I don't know any other way to say it other than some crazy shit was going on that night, and I seemed to be the only one who really noticed. My wife Beth and both kids, Julia and Tommy, were sick. That's usually enough to get me out of parties, especially ones I don't want to go to. Hell, we've lied about the kids being sick just for that reason. There was going to be a lot of family there, older family, so not bringing illness in the house would have been a perfect excuse. They had food poisoning from something they ate and I didn't. I can't pass that on, but everyone would have understood. I guess I'm going on about this because I so desperately wish I had never gone to that party that night. My wife works for her uncle who lives a couple doors down from us. There is a golf course he owns on the other side of the street from our nice big lots. Behind our houses, just through the trees, is the river. This is prime property. Her uncle, Rex Dole III, owns the course. He holds the mortgage to our house that we pay him in cash, and he owns a lot of the surrounding land in town. All right. Beth wanted me to make an appearance and offer my apologies for her. Problem was, it was a dinner party with several courses, with conversation and mingling and drinks and such between. Once I was there for the haul. It. Hey, your title immediately made me think of a song, "The Girl and the Clockwork Dragon" by the Cog is Dead. Yeah. That story was sort of a steampunk story that had knights fighting dragons and airships. Right now, I'm reading a story that I wrote earlier. That it's kind of a take on a ghost story. So this one should be final draft as I'm going through this one here. All right. It wasn't so bad at first. I strolled in. Everyone was greeting and joking and drinking, of course. Neighborhood folks were there. I like a few of them. Uncle Rex's business friends were there. I like a couple of them and can avoid the rest. Then other family filled out the room along with their kids. I like my kids. I don't much care for other people's kids. Beth's family I like in small doses and not all at once. But I was there, so I circulated the crowd, nodded through droning conversations. Each time I got bored, I pointed to someone across the room who wasn't even looking at me, and I excused myself to start the cycle over again with someone else. I am terrible with names and personal details. I can't ever keep track of who is married, divorced, pregnant, or anything else. I once asked a lady from work how the baby was doing after she miscarried twice. I'd forgotten. Beth always jokes that with me that I fill that part of my brain with movie trivia instead. The bad spot in my memory was part of what made this night so terrifying. Glass broke outside on the sprawling flagstone patio overlooking the river. It turned out to be 3 full bottles of wine, probably expensive wine knowing Uncle Rex. I guess it was turning into that kind of party. Then I saw the guy and my whole night changed. I swear to God, I thought Mitchell Creek was dead, but there he was, actually cradling a guitar like a college kid instead of a dead man in his 80s, as he talked to a few other neighbors not quite as old as him, but real close. I just stared. Someone stopped by me, touched my arm, and carried on a whole conversation by themselves as I nodded, grunted, and tried to figure out why no one else thought it was weird that a dead man had joined the party. My wife hates it when I just say yeah and okay in the right spots while she's talking. Whoever that had my arm didn't seem to notice as I tried to put the pieces together. I almost texted Beth to ask if Mitchell had died. She was sick, so I decided to leave her out of it. The neighborhood old folks did golf on Tuesdays and Thursdays, followed by afternoon drinking. Mitchell was wearing his golf shirt and had that leathery old man tan going. Okay, I tried to fit the pieces of what I remembered. I remembered him going to the hospital the last time because I cut my leg pretty bad working in the yard, and Beth drove me to the emergency room right past Mitchell's house, where his wife stood outside as they loaded him into the ambulance that took him away forever. I remembered a conversation with Uncle Rex where he said that when they tried to save Mitchell, his arteries and heart had been as hard as a rock in some places, but thin as paper in others. It was a wonder he still lived that long. They took up a collection for his wife. Beth and I put in a little. They were working on a fountain in the pond out by the 18th green as a memorial. Mitchell put down the guitar, and I heard him complain about the neighbor's grass being too high. That sounded like him. Didn't sound like something a dead guy would care about. I almost grabbed Rex's arm as he patted my shoulder, but kept walking. But what the hell was I supposed to say? Isn't that guy over there complaining about the neighbors like old times supposed to be dead? It felt like that might be as bad or worse than asking the lady at work how the baby was doing. There was no one I could talk to about this. Maybe I could ask Mitchell himself. Hell, he might get a kick out of it. The idea of looking into his eyes after I saw him loaded into that ambulance filled me with ice water. Maybe it was Michael, I muttered out loud. Okay, that made more sense. Michael was old as hell too. He lived around the corner from us. Maybe I was confused about which old dude everyone had been talking about dying. That may have been embarrassing if I'd said something. Don't ask about the baby, I said to myself. We all sat down at various tables around the house, not everyone in the same room. Mitchell and his wife sat at the far end of the table I got sat at. Across from me were my wife's cousin, her husband, and their little kids, Ashley and Freddie. I hadn't seen them for years, but they looked great. Ashley could barely see over the table, but she was well behaved. A nice reprieve from most of the kids running around the house. It turned out those wine bottles got broken by kids playing tag outside. I remembered years ago at that last reunion we were all at that Freddie pushed his little sister into the water. I had to fish her out. I was still spooked by my misidentification of who had died. My eyes kept drifting to the other end of the table as I nodded through the conversations around me. The food was a little rich for me, but I got through it. As we started to get up for a break between courses, all the strength went out of my legs. Mitchell was going on about mailbox keys. He worked with the homeowners association on that bit. People did not like dealing with him on lost keys. I couldn't stand without holding this chair because my heart was racing again. It was Mitchell who died. I knew it. The memorial fountain was across from his house so his widow could see it. The same widow who was on his arm right then as he went on about the damn mailbox keys. I tried to think through it. Maybe this was Michael. I was confusing him for Mitchell because their names were alike and they were both men in their mid to late 80s. Maybe I had confused their names with each other the whole time I lived here. That wouldn't be great, but better than a dead man walking around with only me noticing. That did look like Mitchell's wife, though. I found somewhere else to go in the house and somewhere else to sit for the next course. I started drinking a little more than I tended to on a typical night. As we dug into some meat and potatoes this time, I froze mid-bite. It wasn't Mitchell this time, although he was not far from my mind. Ashley and Freddie had still been little kids. I just saw them earlier and didn't piece together that they were still the same age as last time I saw them years ago. The girl's hair was different and Freddie seemed calmer, which gave him the appearance of being older, but they hadn't aged a day. I could see the parents not looking all that much older. Some folks can still look young going from their 20s to their 30s. Not me, but some people. Kids change a lot, though, especially when they are young. How long had it been? I wanted to say 5 years, but I think it was closer to 7 or 8 years since I pulled that little girl out of the pool. Can't be, I said. It just can't be. Maybe it was 2 or 3 years. That still didn't make a lot of sense, but it would be better. I sat there with my fork covered over my plate, trying to put together a timeline. We took that trip when we still lived in another state. That was 5 years minimum, but probably closer to 8, I said. Someone stopped us to give a toast. It sounded like Uncle Rex had a bit of a cough. His throat rumbled as he talked about family and friends and time spent together. At the end of it, Uncle Rex, without a gravelly throat, said, "Thanks, Dad, that was wonderful." Everyone around the table spoke over one another in agreement. I turned my head in time to see Uncle Rex helping his father, Rex Dole II, back into his wheelchair. Now I couldn't swallow. I knew that guy was dead. I knew it for a fact. He used to live in the house that Uncle Rex Dole III rented to us and then mortgaged to us. The doorways were extra wide for that wheelchair. The toilets were extra high. Any time I stopped in a bathroom outside my house, I felt like I was falling when I sat down. Our house was built for Uncle Rex's aging parents. His mom had died first, and then Rex II's shortly after from an infection in his leg from a scratch he got off a thorn bush while golfing that turned septic. We attended the funeral a month before we moved into the house. There was no denying this. Was Rex too going to come back home with me because he thought it was still his house? If I saw Uncle Rex's mom roll in, I might die right on the spot myself. Of course, at this party, that may not have made any difference. I dropped my fork with a clatter, pushed back my chair, and worked my way through the house to the outside patio. A couple of men from Rex's business world stood off to one side smoking. I wandered the other way and tried to draw in as much of the night air as I could. I happened to look through the bright windows and saw Mitchell leaning down to talk to little Ashley and Freddie, two kids that stopped aging almost a decade ago. I could imagine dead Mitchell with his bad heart saying, "You guys are growing up so fast. If only that were true." I looked down at the wide purple stain that spread out around me under my feet. A few slivers of mist wine bottle glass sparkled in the gas lantern light out there. It looked like something had been sacrificed on these patio stones. "How's the baby doing?" I whispered. Sweat broke out on my forehead and I felt dizzy. Another voice locked me cold. I didn't want to turn around because I knew what I would see, but I still told myself I was hearing things. I was making this all up in my head. But I did turn, and I had to. Sure enough, the voice matched the face. Grant Dole, my wife's late brother, stood there smoking a cigarette with two of Rex Dole III's business associates. Grant was talking computers and copier and network integration with them. It's what he used to do 5 years ago, before he died. Beth attended the funeral while I kept the kids with me at our old house. That's how she said she wanted it, but she still got mad about it with me later. I kept my distance and let her grieve. She got mad about that. I tried to be close and comforting, and that pissed her off too. It was a rough couple years after we first moved into the new house. She hurt badly, and I didn't know how to fix it. Holidays were the worst. She still got sad, but not like before. It made me mad to see him. What he put her through, and to be out here now smoking and talking shop instead of decaying in the ground where he belonged. She was just getting back to normal, and here he stood in this party of dead people. If Beth had come, she would have been heartbroken to see him again, whatever this vision was. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. I was angry at her brother for coming back from the dead and standing here smoking 2 doors down from his sister, who still wasn't completely over his loss. As I moved back inside, he glanced at me. It was the first of the dead I had seen tonight, who now looked on me directly. For a second, I could tell myself it was just some guy that looked like Grant. Had to be. Any other explanation was insanity. That was the only explanation for any of this. I was losing my mind enough to be mistaken about every apparition I had seen tonight. Then he nodded at me. It had to be him. That was exactly how he nodded. I turned away and stormed back inside. I told myself that anyone could nod that way. There were only so many ways to nod, but I didn't believe it. I passed Ashley in my wife's cousin's arms. My mind insisted that maybe I didn't actually save her from the pool that day. Maybe she died too. And then what happened to Freddie? It wasn't true, couldn't be, but I felt the bile climbing up the back of my throat. I also thought I only saw 2 guys out there smoking before I heard Grant's voice. I passed Mitchell talking to Rex Dole II in his wheelchair. Mitchell turned toward me and called to my back, "Hey, I have a question for you when you have a second." I rushed out the door and down the dark street toward home. I didn't want to know what his question from beyond the grave might be. Stopping at the end of my driveway, I made a tough choice. I wasn't telling Beth about any of this. Not about her brother. I feared it would trigger something in her and we'd be back to the depths of those endless dark days from before. I couldn't ask her about people I was sure had died. She'd look at me like I was crazy, or she'd tell me that none of those people had died. I was clearly mistaken. Then my world would be the one shattered. I would be the one haunting a world where different people lived and died. I'd be the one far from home. Either way, talking about it was just inviting the dark magic of that party into my own home. I didn't want whatever evil or whatever delusion was involved to follow me here, so I kept all my fears and all these secrets to myself up until now. I slept terribly that night. I kept expecting keys to rattle in my lock. The door would swing open, and Rex Dole II would wheel into the house that was his before it was ours. Maybe Grant would be pushing the chair, and he'd tell us a better way to wire up our internet. I still have dreams about that. The dead bring their party over to our living room. They bleed out purple wine that spreads across our scuffed wood floors like a tribal slaughter to an occult god. I have found an excuse for every single one of Uncle Rex's parties since then. When Beth goes alone with the kids, I fear I'll never see them again. Or when they come back, the kids will suddenly stop growing older. When she comes back each time, I ask her if she saw anyone interesting, like your dead brother, I think, but never say out loud. She always says, if you care to know, you should come next time, you homebody. I laugh along, but the truth is, I don't care to know. I don't care to see who might be making a surprise appearance, nor who might have not aged even a single day. So I'm telling you that's why I'm not going to that party tonight, and I want you to keep all of this to yourself.